Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be creating a landscape painting using watercolor. For this tutorial we will be painting Mount Fuji. I really enjoyed creating this painting and I'm really excited to share with you everything I learned along the way. Make sure if you enjoy this tutorial to like, comment and subscribe for more nature art watercolor content. And we're going to jump straight into the painting today where you can learn step by step with me how to recreate this piece. To begin with for this painting, I went in with some black watercolour for the branches. Usually I'd go for maybe black with a little bit of blue and add a little bit more colour to the black. But I wanted this to really stand out, so I went straight in with the black to create these branches. I did this as thin as I possibly could with the size 2 brush. Also, I'd usually do the background first, but because this cherry blossom has really light petals, you're going to want to create the foundation with the branches to begin with, and then the petals before we go in with the background to make this really stand out. While this is drying, you can then begin painting the mountains. To do this, I created a really light grey with black, blue, and then added lots of water to this to get it as light as possible. So I filled in all of that bottom space where the mountain does get darker in the reference photo, and I also blurred out the edges that come out of the painting as I wanted that blurred effect. I didn't use any washi tape to line the painting as I usually would. Really wanted that to be quite an important part of the painting. You'll notice everything does blur out later on. So I filled in all of the space with that grey, then went in with an even darker grey to add some lines to add a little bit of texture to this mountain. As the light grey is still wet and I went in with that darker grey, it blurred out really well, so you can see the lines, but it's not as obvious. It's very subtle, it doesn't stand out too much, and that's what you want. You do want it to look very natural, and this is the best way to do it with that paper still being wet. Notice as well, all of the lines move up to that top point of the mountain. It's all focused going up that way, and that's just because of the movement of the rocks coming down the mountain. So by doing this, you're going to really be able to identify that this is actually a mountain just with these little lines. We also use the lighter grey more towards the top of the mountains where that snow falls. There's still a couple of lines going through it, just not as many, it's not as dark, so you want to put them in there as well. You may also notice in the reference photo the mountain is darker towards the right hand side of the photograph, and this is because the sun is coming more from the left. So the natural shadows that are being cast means it's very light where the sun is hitting the mountain, and then more towards the right hand side where it curves round a little bit more, it is darker. So I added more of that dark grey towards that side and then more of the lighter grey and less of the dark grey on the left hand side. And once you've had a little bit of drying time as well, you can go back in with that darker grey. Maybe after you've done the snowy mountain at the top, the darker grey can then be added on the bottom because you've left a little bit of room for this to dry. And you can add more clear, distinctive lines. It's not going to blend out as much because the water has dried, so you can really very clearly see the distinction and all of the little details. Creates more intense detail, I would say, which is really important for mountains. It's very rigid because it is rocks, very clear, concise lines. So by adding this in, you are very distinctly creating this mountain and developing the lines of detail. So now that we have the mountain all finished, we can move on to painting the sea. To do this, I use the wet in wet method, and this means adding a light layer of water down and then going in with your paints. Created a really light blue for this, adding lots of water to get it as light as possible, and then created a dark blue by using blue and adding dark grey that we used for the mountains at the start to this to make it dark and quite cold in comparison to that baby blue that we've just pre-mixed to start with. And I also mixed a turquoise, so I used the same blue and added a little bit of green to this with lots of water to lighten. It's good to have these 3 different colours as you're going to have lots of different dimensions and not everything will be the same colour, so to have that variety is important. So once you've got that light layer down with the water, you can use that light blue to add a light wash of all the colour we're going to be adding in all the right places. So rather than putting it down everywhere, I went into the lines that I have for the traced outline and followed this, as there's a lot of ripples in the reference photo through the water, and I really wanted to make sure I got all of this down. As you can see on the bottom right, they're really dark and there's a lot of lines that are very symmetrical going across that bottom half of the page, and then the top left there's almost like an S shape with the ripples there, and I made sure I got all them in and blended them all out with some water, but still made sure to darken, and I still added the little dots and the blend out on all of the edges, as you can see, and this is going to really help with the overall finish of the piece with that nice curved edge. And then once I got the initial layers mapped in, I went in with the dark blue, darkened up that bottom section, and I kept layering and layering this colour, not doing anything different every single time. It's just going in and really developing each time, and because we're taking our time with the layers, it is creating that nice natural blend rather than going straight in with that dark colour. And I left a little bit of negative space just in the middle below the mountain, as it was really light in the reference, and you don't want to add dark into any of these light sections. You do want that transition of colour between the light and dark, as it's easy to go in with the dark expecting the sea to all look the same, but where the sun is beaming down, you're going to have lighter areas. Where it isn't and you've got them shadows created by the cliffs, the mountains even, you're going to have darker areas. So just be conscious of that when mapping this in. And then with a little bit of that turquoise, just get a few lines of that in there again, so you've got that variety in terms of colour. Now I'm going back to the cherry blossoms, so I've pre-mixed a pink, a purple and an orangey yellow, definitely more on the yellow side. To begin with, I'm going to go in with the pink, and I use this to put a few dots for where the centre of the flowers were going to fall, and then I went in with some purple for the darker areas, more towards the bottom left of this cherry blossom branch, and just got a few dots in, overlapped it on some of the pink, let them blend together, and this is the foundation for these flowers. Then I moved on to putting in the cliff that you can see that's coming out from the left hand side, that then blocks over that mountain area on the right, and I used that dark grey that we created for the mountain, darkened it a little bit more actually, but I used this to add a few little lines in there. Again, if you've got the outline that I've created for this tutorial, this is going to help massively with this, because you can just paint into them lines. And I blurred out that edge on the left hand side, as I've been doing consistently throughout the painting, and I also added some of that turquoise that we've been using with the water. We didn't actually use that much within the sea, but I put some of that over the top of the lighter areas, letting it all blend together. Wasn't worried about it going into the darker areas, as I wanted them to merge a little bit and blend nicely. And I also didn't follow the reference photo exactly in terms of all the detail involved in the cliff, as this would have taken a really long time. Of course, if you want to do that, that's not a problem, but this tutorial took about 3 hours, I want to say, to complete, and that was still quite lengthy for a landscape piece. In some of the lighter areas on the mountain as well, I did go back in with some of the grey just to match it up to the rest of the painting and the darkest surrounding it. You don't want a really dark section and then it going completely the opposite way. You do want that natural transition, and blending all this together is just going to help make it look a little bit more realistic. You may also notice as well, the same way that the mountain, all of the lines worked its way up to that centre point, the same thing happens with this cliff. So all of the lines are going out towards the left hand top side where the peak of the cliff will be. So it all matches up to that, and it's very consistent with the techniques that we are using. And then once I'm happy with the cliff, I went into the cherry blossoms again. This should have allowed enough time for the pink and purple to dry, and I used the orangey goldy yellow and dotted this around all of them centre points, keeping it quite messy. This is going to give the illusion of cherry blossoms. and then jumping back down into the sea. Whilst this is drying, I painted the boat. You can see the boat with the two little people. Used black watercolour to do this, kept it really small and simple, didn't add any detail, no highlights, just wanted a nice silhouette, and I think this really helps tie the ocean together. I think it's a really nice touch. Then looking back down at the cliffs, I added a few little lines just to replicate buildings. If you don't want to do this though, just bring the cliff right the way down. It's not an issue if you are stressed about painting buildings. This can be quite difficult, and I didn't really want too many involved, if I'm honest, so I only put a couple in there. And then again, letting this all dry, jumping back up to that sky area, using the wet in wet method again like we did down below for the sea, getting an even spread of water down, going around the mountain, the cliff and the cherry blossoms. Want to really make sure not to get water into this, as the colours we're going to add for the background will then just bleed into all this and it will become very messy, and you can't really do much to tidy this up. I used the same light blue that I used for the sea for the bottom of the sky, coming out from the mountain and the cliff, added a little bit of that in there. Some of the grey that we've used consistently throughout, used this to create clouds, and all I did to create clouds was just add tiny little dots and let it bleed out, so little strips of dots. Didn't want to overwork this, let it bleed out, and I wasn't worried about it looking the exact same as the reference photo. I was quite happy for it to look a little bit different if the colours bled a certain way. I also added some of that really nice gold colour that we've used for the cherry blossoms, got this into the sky, mainly towards that sun area, towards the middle of the page, and also put some of this through the clouds. I think this tied everything together really nicely. If you're enjoying this video so far, make sure to check out all of the links down below in the description. You can find links to my Patreon, where I upload weekly real-time nature art themed tutorials, and I've also recently begun hosting weekly live classes every Sunday, which means we can interact and you can ask me absolutely anything about all the paintings we will be creating. Getting back to the painting now, I let everything dry before going any further, as everything in the background could bleed into all of the final details we're going to be adding. I went in with the dark grey and began adding trees, as we've got that background now, so it doesn't matter that this is going to go over that, as it's going to sit over the top really nicely because it is darker than what is behind it. So using that dark grey, I added little lines going upwards and then dots surrounding that, getting wider as you get further to the ground, and this replicates trees. It's a super easy way to do this. You can add as many or as little as you like. I love the way this looks, so I added it all the way across. And you can further darken up certain areas. I went in with some black watercolour for my cherry blossoms, added some more branches. I added a couple of dots going actually into the flowers, so it looked like you had the buds and then the flowers coming out from that. And I further extended this out a little bit more to the left, as it ends very abruptly at the minute, so I extended it and then blended it out with some water, so it looks like it goes into the background almost a little bit. And once again, I was happy with this. I went back into the sea area, which of course is now dry, and I used the really dark blue that we pre-mixed earlier on and added a few more details, just further developing the layers. I didn't really do anything that different, it was just going in, but this time, because the painting's dry, if you do want to blend out a little bit more, you're going to have to use water to do so, but it's nice to be able to have the details added in and not worry about it bleeding out too much. And if you look under the boat in the reference photo, there's actually a little bit of a blend there, and the reflection on the water is really quite clear. So to do this, you want to use a light grey instead of black. You want it to be lighter. And I just painted the exact same thing but upside down, so it almost flips it. Blend this out with a little bit of water and brush so it looks like the reflection is blending into the sea, which is exactly what you want for this type of painting, and it really does help tie that sea together. It makes it look a little bit more realistic as reflections are there throughout the sea, and you only need a little bit of water when you are blending out. I'm going to put emphasis on this because the silhouette is really small, so if you are using a lot of water it'll blend out too much and it'll become very messy, so just a little bit will help do this. Then to finish, I went in with some white acrylic to add highlights. I did this mainly around the flowers, going over that gold section. Same thing with the dots, and this is just going to help the cherry blossoms really stand out amongst the background, as I think this is definitely a focal point for the painting. And I added a few little lines through the sea, the mountains, some of the clouds as well. I did a few dots to create the highlights for the tops and bottoms of them, and that is how to tie it all together. That is how I created this watercolour painting. I really hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Make sure to like and comment, letting me know exactly what you thought, and if there's anything you'd like advice on, I will promise to reply to you in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe as well for more nature art themed content, and I really hope to see you all next time for more landscape paintings as part of my watercolour series. You can also check out my Patreon for real-time tutorials that I upload weekly for a small fee of only £10 a month. All of these links are down in the description. I'll see you all next time, more landscape paintings. Thank you for watching, guys. Bye!